Imagine looking at your hair today and seeing nothing alarming. No bald spot. No handful of hair in the shower. Your hairline still looks almost the same. And yet, underneath that apparently normal hairstyle, some follicles may already be changing. This is what makes early pattern hair loss so deceptive. People imagine balding as hair disappearing. But androgenetic alopecia often begins with something much harder to notice. Hairs that are still present become slightly thinner, grow for less time, and eventually stop reaching the same length as the hairs beside them. By the time the scalp becomes obviously visible, the biological process may have been developing for years. And a recent study adds an even more surprising possibility. Researchers tracking individual hairs in balding men found that shortening of the growth phase could occur before the hair shaft became dramatically thinner. In other words, the clock inside the follicle may begin changing before the mirror clearly shows the damage. So, how can you tell the difference between normal shedding, a naturally changing hairline, and the beginning of real pattern hair loss? By the end of this video, you will know the early signs most people overlook, which popular signs are surprisingly unreliable, and what dermatologists can see long before an obvious bald patch appears. But before we dive into the science, please subscribe to HairLab Explained if you want to understand hair loss through evidence, not myths. Now, let's begin. Balding does not begin with baldness. To understand early hair loss, forget the idea that a follicle simply switches from alive to dead. Androgenetic alopecia is mainly a process of progressive follicular miniaturization. In genetically sensitive follicles, androgen signaling, especially involving DHT, changes the hair cycle. The growth phase, called anagen, becomes shorter. The follicle becomes smaller, and the hair it produces becomes progressively shorter and finer. Imagine a factory that once produces thick rope. The factory is still operating, but each new order becomes smaller. Thick rope becomes ordinary cord. Cord becomes thread. Eventually, the factory may produce something so fine and short that from across the room, it looks as though production has stopped. That means an early balding scalp may still contain thousands of hairs. The important difference is that those hairs are no longer equal. And this gives us the first sign dermatologists look for. Not simply fewer hairs. Different sized hairs growing beside one another. Under magnification, a healthy scalp tends to contain relatively consistent terminal hairs. In androgenetic alopecia, some follicles remain strong while others miniaturize. The result is hair diameter diversity, thick hairs mixed with intermediate hairs, and extremely fine hairs. A recent systematic review found hair diameter variability in approximately 94% of patients with androgenetic alopecia, making it the most common trichoscopic feature identified. Short vellus hairs were another major finding. To your eye, the area may still look covered. Under magnification, the decline has already begun. Sign 1. Your hairs stop matching each other. Take two strands from the same part of a healthy donor area near the back of the head. They will not be perfectly identical, but their thickness should usually be reasonably similar. Now examine an area undergoing pattern hair loss. One strand may look strong. Beside it is a thinner strand. Beside that is a tiny, pale hair only a few millimeters long. This variation has a name: anisotrichosis, or hair shaft diameter diversity. In men, hair diameter diversity greater than roughly 20% in an androgen-sensitive area has traditionally been used as an important diagnostic clue, although exact thresholds can vary between populations and measurement methods. And here is why this matters. You cannot reliably detect that change by counting hairs in the sink. Miniaturization is happening to hairs that are still attached to your head. That is why someone can say, "I'm not shedding much," while their density slowly decreases. The disappearance happens gradually because each follicle is producing less useful material. This is the first major lesson. Balding is not only about losing hairs. It is about losing hair quality. Sign 2. Some hairs never grow as long. The second sign is even easier to misunderstand. Imagine the hairs around your temple used to grow long enough to join the rest of your hairstyle. Now some of them seem permanently short. You cut your hair. 3 months pass. Most hairs grow normally, but a group near the recession zone remains wispy and short. Those may not simply be baby hairs. Miniaturized follicles can produce finer hairs and spend less time in the active growth phase. Because the growth period becomes shorter, the strand may fall before it ever reaches its old length. Think of two runners. One is allowed to run for 3 hours. The other is stopped after 20 minutes. Even if both move at a similar speed, one will travel much farther. Hair works similarly. Final length depends not only on how quickly it grows, but on how long the follicle remains in anagen. This is why early pattern hair loss can create a strange texture around the frontal edge. Thick hairs mixed with thin, soft, shorter hairs that refuse to behave like the rest. And those small hairs matter far more than many people realize. They may be the visible evidence of follicles still producing hair, but doing it increasingly poorly. Sign 3. The pattern matters more than the shower. Now we reach one of the biggest hair loss myths. People often try to diagnose baldness by counting hairs in the shower. 30 hairs, 50 hairs, 100 hairs. Then panic begins. But shedding alone is a poor way to diagnose androgenetic alopecia. Humans naturally shed telogen hairs as part of the normal hair cycle, and the apparent number changes with washing frequency, hair length, brushing, and how easily shed hairs are noticed. Some men with pattern hair loss never notice dramatic shedding at all. They simply realize that their hair gradually occupies less space. At the same time, sudden heavy shedding can point towards something different, such as telogen effluvium, which may occur after illness, major weight loss, medication changes, surgery, or other physiological stressors. AGA and telogen effluvium can also exist together. So instead of asking only, "How many hairs am I losing?" ask, "Where is the change happening?" In men, androgenetic alopecia commonly affects the temples, frontal scalp, mid-scalp, and vertex, while the sides and occipital donor region remain relatively preserved. That pattern is a much stronger clue than one frightening shower. If the front is becoming progressively thinner, while the back remains stable, the geography of the loss is telling you something. Hair loss has a map, and pattern hair loss tends to follow one. Sign 4. The crown starts betraying you in photos. The crown creates another problem because you rarely look directly at it. A person may spend months inspecting the hairline while the earliest obvious density change is happening behind them. Then someone takes a photograph from above. Suddenly there is scalp. But one photograph is not proof. Bright overhead lighting, wet hair, greasy hair, shorter haircuts, flash photography, and the natural whirl at the crown can all expose scalp that was always visible. This is why random photographs are poor evidence. The useful signal is change under the same conditions. Same room, same lighting, same camera distance, same hairstyle, same direction. Then compare months rather than days. If the central scalp or crown progressively allows more light through while surrounding areas remain stable, that trend matters far more than a single bad photograph. And there is another change underneath that photographs cannot show clearly. In AGA, trichoscopy frequently reveals an increasing number of follicular units producing only one visible hair instead of multiple hairs. Fine vellus hairs and parafollicular changes can also appear. Imagine a building with 3 factory doors. Previously, workers leave through all 3. Later, only one door is producing anything. The building still exists, but its output has fallen. That loss of collective output is one reason density can decline before a large bald spot forms. Sign 5. The hairline changes in quality before shape. People obsess over whether one temple sits 2 millimeters higher than the other, but the shape alone can be misleading. Hairlines are naturally asymmetric, and some people develop a more adult frontal shape after adolescence without progressing rapidly toward advanced baldness. The more useful question is what is happening behind and along the edge. Are there increasing numbers of fine hairs? Is the transition zone becoming wider? Are formerly strong hairs becoming softer and shorter? Is density just behind the hairline declining? Is the change continuing across standardized photographs? A stable hairline shape with uniformly strong hair is very different from the same shape surrounded by increasingly miniaturized hairs. The border tells only half the story. The quality of the hairs behind it tells the other half. This is why a dermatologist with a trichoscope can sometimes identify androgenetic alopecia before the average observer sees anything dramatic. Trichoscopy magnifies hair diameter, follicular units, vellus hairs, yellow dots, parafollicular discoloration, and other clues that cannot be judged reliably from a selfie. The mirror sees the forest. Trichoscopy can inspect the individual trees. The signs that should not be ignored. There is one important warning. Not every changing scalp is androgenetic alopecia. Rapid diffuse shedding, circular bald patches, broken hairs, heavy scaling, redness, pustules, significant pain, burning, or loss of normal follicular openings may point toward other hair or scalp disorders. Scarring alopecias are particularly important because inflammation can permanently destroy follicles if diagnosis is delayed. Pattern hair loss usually preserves the follicular openings. Loss of those openings is a key clue that a scarring process may be present and deserves dermatologic evaluation. This means the goal of early detection is not to make people diagnose themselves from every hair in the sink. It is the opposite. It is to recognize when a pattern deserves proper evaluation instead of months of guessing. The real early warning. So, what is the earliest sign that you are going bald? There is no single universal moment. But the most useful early warning is not usually a giant shed. It is progressive miniaturization in a recognizable pattern. Hairs stop matching in diameter. Some become shorter. More scalp gradually becomes visible under consistent conditions. The temples, frontal scalp, or crown change while resistant areas remain stronger. And under magnification, the difference becomes even clearer. This produces the most important distinction in the entire video. A shower tells you what fell out today. Miniaturization tells you what your follicles are becoming. And if you are trying to detect pattern hair loss early, the second question is usually far more valuable. Take standardized photographs every few months rather than checking the mirror 20 times per day. If something appears to be progressing, a dermatologist can examine the pattern and use trichoscopy to distinguish miniaturization from other causes of shedding or thinning. Because early treatment does not guarantee complete preservation. But treatment generally has more existing hair to protect before severe miniaturization has developed than after an area has become cosmetically empty. If you're looking for trusted hair loss products or personalized treatment options, you'll find carefully selected resources in the description below. The unforgettable lesson is simple. You do not have to look bald to be balding. The first warning may not be missing hair. It may be hair that is still there, but quietly becoming thinner, shorter, and less productive with every cycle. Because every answer leads to another question. Why do some men begin losing those hairs at 18 or 20, while others reach 50 with almost the same hairline they had decades earlier? In our next video, we will uncover why some men go bald incredibly young while others barely lose hair at all, and why blaming everything on your mother's father gets the genetics completely wrong. The answer might completely change the way you think about your own risk of hair loss. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe to HairLab Explained. I'll see you in the next video.